Ladies and gentlemen, it's so good to have you back for another episode of MFF University. Today is day 3, and we're going to be talking about character builds and how to identify which characters to build versus which ones not to build, and then also when you're identifying a character to build, how to go about it in the most efficient way possible. Right off the bat, you're probably wondering, why are we looking at Sin if we're talking about character builds, Alex? Isn't Sin a really bad character that you shouldn't build? Well, yes, but in my case, she happens to be a character that isn't built, so she is a perfect blank slate opportunity to showcase all of the different aspects and facets of a character build that you can work on so that we can prioritize them from most important to least important. But in general, yes, Sin falls under the category of characters that you shouldn't work on and you shouldn't build unless it's a, personal, passion project for a character that you really love, and then that's just a personal opinion that you have to take, right? I'm not here to tell you which characters to work on specifically. That's what the meta tier list is for, and that's just my opinion at the end of the day. But if you want to figure out how to best build whatever character it is that you're working on, then this is exactly what you need to check out. So we're going to go through this systematically. You can have a different way of doing it, but in my opinion, the best way to go about building a character is to first identify the following. Why build the character? Now, if we're not doing it for a passion project, if we're not doing it as a sort of personal thing, then in my opinion, you have to ask yourself the question, am I building this character because they're a DPS? You can refer to the first MFF University video for what a DPS means. Is the character a DPS, right? If they're a DPS, you want to give them a full build or as close to a full build as possible. What about if they're a leadership? Well, if they're a leadership, in the case of a leadership, then I would say it's a bare bones build. And then if they're a support character, for the most part, I would also say it's a bare bones build. Now, there are exceptions to this, and PvP is the notable exception to this. But by and large, for all leaderships and all supports, for new players and returning players and mid-level players, you don't want to sink resources into building them because their leadership just functions on having their mastery at level 6. That's it. Right, that's all that matters, or just having them tier 2 or just having them at tier 3 with their mastery so they can go into World Boss Legend, so on and so forth. So the support and the leadership category doesn't require a build whatsoever because of that. Now, yes, PvP is the notable exception to this, so I will briefly touch on PvP. In PvP, you will see characters like Molecule Man. You will see characters like Ancient One, and these are leadership only or support only characters. Now, in PvP, you want to squeeze out every bit of value from your characters as possible because you have such a small roster, and it's your roster versus the opponent's roster. So having a better build, better than a bare bones build, on Ancient One here is going to help out. And there are some additional reasons why Ancient One has some value as a reflect character, etc. But by and large, for most other content, right, content that's not PvP, you don't need to build up Ancient One. Building up Ancient One, building up other supports or leaderships does not improve their support or their leadership, right? Giving them a stacked build and increasing their growth score until they're rank 1 has absolutely no impact on their performance, because if they're just a leadership or just a support, then their function will be the same whether you're rank 1 or you're rank 40,000. So yeah, we first identify whether it's a DPS, leadership, or support, and then we basically just ignore the supports and leaderships unless it's PvP, and we just focus on DPSs. So for the purpose of this video, we're only going to be talking about DPS and your main damage dealer characters. If this is your main damage dealer, this is how the build should go, in my opinion. So first thing you need to do, and assume this is a DPS character for me, it's obviously not, but for the purposes of this video, it's an example. So the first thing you want to do for a DPS character is you want to look at the skills. Once you've built up the character, of course, right? Character builds, I'm assuming you already know how to get the character to tier 2, you already know how to get the character to tier 3, this sort of thing. So first thing you want to do is look at the skills. You want to identify which skills you absolutely must level beyond level 1, because some skills have buffs. Like this skill has an all speed buff, and those buffs will be lower at a lower stage and they will have less of an impact at level 1. So you want to level them up. If the skill doesn't have any text or has very little text, then you can safely leave the skill at level 1 or level 3 without losing out on important abilities or buffs and without losing out on the all-important damage stat. Now, why do we leave skills at level 3 instead of level 6 or level 1? It's because the amount of gold is multiplicative. So the first level up costs 50,000, the second level up to 3 costs 100,000. Then the third level up costs 200,000. So the first 2 steps from level 1 to level 2 and level 2 to level 3 only cost 150,000, which is more, right? More than the total cost for level 3 to level 4. And then again, it goes up multiplicatively after that. So that's why the advice is stop at level 3, because at level 3 you're halfway there and it only costs you 150,000, whereas the max costs you over 1 million. So do you want to go halfway for 150,000 gold, or do you want to go all the way to 6 for over 1 million gold for almost 10 times the amount, right? You don't want to do that. So yeah, that's the first thing, is to identify which skills are required to level and which skills are not required to level. Let's assume this skill had a frenzy buff, had like an attack, all speed, all defense, frenzy buff. Then you would want to level it up to level 6. Otherwise, leave it at level 1 or leave it at level 3. After you've gone through the skills, then you want to hit up the gear. Like I said, this build and this guide sort of assumes that you know how to get a character to tier 2 or get a character to tier 3, but presumably, right, hypothetically, if Sin could get to level to tier 3, then I would have to get her gears to 25. So then I would have to go and do that, right? Obviously, this is a very important part of character builds. You're not going to get the most out of your character if you don't level up their gear, all 4 of the gears, because as you can see, it gives them stats, right? It gives them stats, which increases the base stats, increase the stats later on when you apply percentage stats, because when you apply a percentage stat to all attack, it's going to look at that base stat and then increase it by a percentage. So the higher the base stat is, the better it is for the percentage increases later on. So you've got the skills, you've got the gear, and you've identified whether it's a physical or attack character. Now you have to identify what weaknesses your cards have so that you can shore them up with the rest of your build, because the rest of your build, obviously you're building a DPS character, you're going to make them as strong as possible, but you also want to make sure that they don't have any glaring weaknesses. So in Sin's case, when we go to the details page, and this is what you would do for every character that you're trying to build properly, you're going to look and see how many yellow stats you have. You only have 1 yellow stat here for Sin, which is cooldown. At minimum, you want 2 yellow stats for every character that you're going to be using as a DPS, because you need to have the ignore defense and the skill cooldown capped. It would also be nice to have the crit damage capped and maybe have the attack speed capped. So maybe we have now 4 skills we need to have capped or have very close to cap as possible. So how can we achieve this? Well, the simplest and easiest way is through Uru on the gear and through your ISO 8. These are the 2 easiest ways to get a lot of skill cooldown, ignore defense, attack speed, and crit damage as fast as possible and as efficiently as possible. There are other ways, but in my opinion, they're not as efficient, they're not as fast, and they're not as easy. The other way you can do it, however, is the 4th gear. The 4th gear is a quick and dirty way to get some extra stats. However, I hesitate suggesting this right off the bat for players because I find that they just zone in on this and they ignore everything else. And then what happens is they change every character's 4th gear to ignore defense. They change it like that. And then every character from here until the end of time that they build, they have to change the 4th gear to ignore defense. And what that does is it sinks a lot of gold, right? Because it's not always going to cost you 1 roll. Sometimes it's going to cost you 10 rolls or 20 rolls or 50 rolls. And then you have to do that for 200 characters. So then you multiply that and suddenly you've spent 50 million gold over the course of whatever to build that. The 4th gear is sort of a last option, in my opinion, like a last-ditch effort if you can't get the stats that you need. But in this case, with the 4th gear, as you can see here from the details page, we're able to cap her ignore defense and her cooldown. Okay, but we need to go a little bit higher here because we need those other stats capped as well. This is where your ISO 8 stat and your Uru come into play. So for the ISO 8 set, in my opinion, there's only 3 good options that you should aim for: Hawk's Eye, Power of Angry Hulk, and Overdrive. All 3 of these are going to give you very important stats. They're going to give you attack, etc. And they're going to give you either ignore defense or skill cooldown. So it really depends on what you need. These 2 give you ignore defense, and then Hawk's Eye gives you skill cooldown. And then they also give you, Overdrive gives you more crit damage, and Power of Angry Hulk gives you more attack speed. So you have to sort of figure out what you need. There are exceptions to this. If you're building a character for PvP, we can't really get into that in this video because it's a lot more complicated and there's a lot more variables. But in general, it's one of these 3 that you want to aim for, and you want to aim to re-roll your ISO set when you are when you have a discount, when there's a discount in effect, which happens about once a month where they give you a 50% discount. Okay, so you rolled your ISO 8 set, now you have to equip your ISO. This is why you need to know whether the character is an energy or a physical attacker, because certain ISO, like the red and the silver and the chaotic, the rainbow one, they're going to have rolls that are either all attack or a specific kind of attack, like physical for the silver or energy for the red. So if I go here and I equip this energy attack one, this is actually not going to do anything for Sin because she's not an energy attacker. I would need to find a red one that has all basic attack, and then I would need to equip that. Right now, you want to equip the best ones you have, but obviously you want to manage your inventory, so I can't really comment too much on this because it's on a case-by-case basis. If you don't have any Uru, or sorry, if you don't have any ISO, you're going to have to go and farm it. Same goes for Uru. Obviously, you need to manage your inventory yourself. It's more about learning, what is acceptable. So, and sort of your minimum thresholds for value. So the minimum threshold for value here on an ISO 8 set is stage 6. You want to aim for stage 6 when you're building out an ISO 8 set, because that is where you're going to get the max orange bonus. You're not going to get the max white bonus, but you're going to get the max orange bonus. So as you can see here, I have overdrive, but I only have 6.5% of these stats, 6.8 or 6.5. That's not high enough. I want to go higher. So we're going to go ahead and equip a silver one that's quite a bit higher. We're going to go physical attack. Here, physical attack or all attack doesn't matter because she is a physical attacker. We're going to go ahead and equip this basic attack down here, and we're going to replace this. And now we're at stage 5. Okay, we're almost there. And then we're going to go ahead and equip one more that is right here, and we should get to, no, we're still at stage 5. All right, we're going to equip one more here that's physical defense. That's okay. We're still at stage 5. Holy. We'll go one more here, energy defense. This is fine. And now we're at stage 6. So now that we're at stage 6 and we check the bonuses, you can see you're at 8.5 and 8.1. That's the max. If you go from stage 6 to stage 12, it doesn't matter. It's still going to be 8.5 and 8.1. It's only that white stat at the bottom that increases your attack temporarily. That is going to go up from 20 to 40%. Now, don't get me wrong, that can be important, but it's not as important as what we just did. What we just did is much more important because it gives us those flat stats permanently on the ISO for this specific character. So you want to aim for stage 6 on your ISO. After you've done that, you take a look at your stats and you're like, oh, my crit damage went up, other things went up. This is looking pretty nice, but we still want to get that attack speed higher. So now you have a couple of options. You can go with Uru, or you can do something else. In the case of attack speed specifically, it doesn't give you as much value as other stats do for Uru because it's a lower percentage to cap. I don't want to spend too long explaining this, but essentially attack speed's cap is 130, which is very low, and then crit damage's cap is 200%, which is very high. So one Uru for crit damage will give you more towards a percentage than one attack speed Uru. So in general, for attack speed, you want to get it from your ISO, or you want to get it from your 4th gear, or you want to get it from your uniform if the character has one, or you want to get it from skills like a frenzy buff or something like that, rather than getting it from your Uru. But anyways, from your Uru, at the very minimum, what you want to do, especially for a DPS character, of course, is to equip 8 attack Uru of the stat that matches your character. So remember at the beginning, we figured out that Sin was a physical attacker. So now I'm going to go in and I'm going to give her Uru that is physical attack, not energy attack. Now, I would say if you have the resources, aim for your DPS is aim for 4-star Uru. 4-star Uru is going to be a sort of good middle ground between something that you can farm up and is not too expensive, and also something that you can farm up enough of to have for different characters. Obviously, 5-star Uru is better, and 6-star Uru is even better, but it's much harder to get those. As you can see, I have over 300 4-star Uru, but I only have 31 6-star. And I expect that you have much lower values if you're a newer player. So I wouldn't say to aim for the moon on every single character that you build unless it's a passion project. I think 4-star Uru is just fine. It works just well. So there we go. We have 8 physical attack Urus, and now you can see my physical attack stat has gone up dramatically to almost 30,000. That's great. Now I want to add some more stats. So we're going to go ahead, because we've already capped ignore defense and we've already capped cooldown, we're going to give her some crit damage. Now, we could give her attack speed, but in my opinion, if you wanted to give her attack speed, it's easier and simpler to just reroll the overdrive to Power of Angry Hulk. You're going to lose crit damage, but you're going to gain attack speed, and then you can still supplement the crit damage on the character gear through Uru or through the 4th gear, rather than doing it the other way around with attack speed. Because as you can see here, we can just quickly do a little test. We're at 23.1 and 175.4. So let's remember that. And we're going to equip a 4-star physical, 4-star attack speed, and we're going to equip a 4-star crit damage. So there we go. And now we're going to take a look here. The 123 went up to 123.8. So I got less than 1% attack speed for that one Uru. Whereas my 175 is now 177. So I got less than 1% attack speed versus more than 2% crit damage. And so because you have a limited number of Uru slots, and because you can only equip 2 Uru of each type, you don't want to equip attack speed or some of these lower end stats, because of the fact that your build just can't support it. And then the other fact here, and this is why you want to focus on your cards for things like skill cooldown, ignore defense, attack speed, is because if every character you want to have a capped attack speed, but every character is rolling overdrive, then every character is going to require like 8 attack speed Urugs. That means you're going to have to farm attack speed Urugs out the wazoo. That's not going to work. That's not really efficient. So that's why you want to identify the easier ways, and in my opinion, attack speed is much easier to get on an ISO 8 set than it is on Uru, and then you can make the Uru work for you better. So we equipped a few more Uru, and now the character is in a better place as far as the stats go. Let's just pretend that the stats are looking better and we're sort of where we want to be for the future. The build isn't done yet, but for the most part, the stats have been fulfilled. Now, there is another important place where you can get stats. For the purposes of this guide, I can't show you because I have every single uniform at Mythic, but the uniform, buying the uniform, and then of course getting the optional uniforms in order to unlock extra stats is a huge way of increasing your character's build with uniform options. Now, of course, this costs you a lot of crystals, so this can be very expensive. In my guides and in my advice in general, I recommend that people focus on the 2nd and the 5th uniform options for characters that have uniforms. Obviously, the newest uniform in general for a character is going to be the best one for them. So going with their base look when they have a uniform is a bad idea. But if you can't afford all of the uniforms or you don't want to buy all of them, the 2nd option gives you a very flexible role where you can go for attack or HP if you want offense or defense. And then the 5th role there gives you different options for different types of attack stats. The 3rd option is also one to consider if you like PvP, because it gives you quite a few options related to core stats like ignore defense and cooldown, but then also important secondary stats like HP. So yeah, the uniform is very, very important. In general, it's just build it up as much as you can and get as many optional uniforms as you can. To get the most out of the optional uniform stats as well, you need to have those uniforms Mythic, so it starts to rack up in terms of the cost and in terms of what's involved. But in general, the advice there is very easy to follow because it's just max it out and then just re-roll the stats to what you need. There's no really finagling. There's no like, special abilities or special equipment you need to get. It's just other uniforms and then just maxing those out. So it doesn't really affect it too much. But keep in mind, just so that we don't go too crazy down the rabbit hole, you do not need to max out the optionals for the optionals in order to get the max stat. So you can see the bonus option on Thena here is 1067. It's 1067 because Thena's uniform is Mythic. It has nothing to do with the fact that these uniforms are Mythic. I don't have to own any uniforms for Thena in order to make sure that the optional bonus she's giving to Adam Warlock is maxed. All I need to make sure is that her uniform itself is Mythic. And you can check that on other accounts where players are missing uniforms, but that is essentially how it works. Okay, so we've tackled the uniform, we've tackled the gear, we've tackled the skills, we've tackled the ISO 8 set. What is next? What's next is basically the custom gear. So the custom gear here for a DPS character, you want to make sure that it's good. At the very least, you want to equip them with an extreme obelisk. This is the bare minimum for a build. In some rare cases, if you're really desperate and you have a decent roll on a 5-star superior obelisk, you can make it work. But let's say for example, this one here has a 140 proc. This is actually not bad. It also has lightning damage and max HP. If you had this and you wanted to give it to like Thor or something like that, or Jane Foster, sure. Or you had something like this with cold damage and crit rate for Luna Snow, that's not terrible. However, you're kind of pushing it, right? At the very minimum, you want something like this, where it's a 200 proc or a 180 proc or something like that. It's an extreme obelisk. It's 6 stars. It's got the highest stat rolls, etc. You can refer to separate videos on how to roll obelisks for the stats there and how to sort of make this work for you. I'm not going to go into that, but you do want to make sure that you're aiming for at least a 5-star or 6-star obelisk. There's really no point in just slapping on a 4-star, random 4-star obelisk if you're trying to build a character sincerely for DPS, right? You want to make sure that they have the damage. You also want to identify whether the character can work with a proc, whether they're proc friendly or not. Not going to get into what that means in this video because it's beyond the scope, but you want to refer to a character's review or like a character guide video specifically to learn about whether a character is proc friendly or not, to learn about whether you want to go with a single damage increase stat like that, or whether you want to go for one that has that increase that is based on your crit rate or your crit damage, sort of like a mini rage proc. Beyond obelisks, obviously we have CTPs. And yes, CTPs are better than obelisks. There's no question there. For the purposes of a DPS build, I would say that they're not necessary when you're first starting out. And until you get your hands on a few CTPs and then you can prioritize them for different characters, I would say don't worry about them. Just getting down the basics and figuring out which obelisk works and figuring out if the character is proc friendly, This is all very valuable research, and I find that a lot of players skip these steps and just go straight to a CTP. And they just slap a CTP on a character and they're like, okay, the character is good now. And that's absolutely not how it works, especially if you skip the other steps in this video where you're actually building up the character properly. You see a lot of times characters that have a CTP equipped, and then you go and they don't have any Uru, and they don't have their skills correctly maxed out for the skills that need to be maxed out, and they have the wrong ISO 8 set, or they have really low level ISO equipped, and you're thinking, what is this player really thinking? Well, they're thinking the CTP is going to do all the work for me, and that's really not how it works. The CTP complements the build, but if your build doesn't have, let's say, 75% crit rate and 75% dodge, then your CTP of Rage is not going to work. Just straight up, that's how it works. If you don't have 50% ignore defense and you don't have 50% skill cooldown, giving a character a CTP of energy is not going to do anything. It's not going to do what you think it's going to do. It's not going to magically make the character better. So that's why I left the CTPs towards the end of the video, because honestly, you can make a better build if you follow all of the steps and then you stop here and you give them an obelisk or you give them nothing. That's a better build than if you slap a CTP and call it a day, especially for a DPS character. If you think the CTP does more work than the ignored defense stat, you're in for a not so fun time. Let's put it that way. You're in for a Dark Souls experience in Marvel Future Fight with your 20% skill cooldown and things like that. So yeah, that's why I made this video third as well, after teams and after stats, because those are more important to be able to understand what you need to do here. So yeah, as far as what CTP to give a character, we have separate videos on that where we go through, top 10 characters for each CTP. We also talk about it when we do character reviews individually. But in general, CTPs function on either a PvE or PvP scale. So, PvE CTPs like Energy, Judgment, and Rage are going to be great for characters that you want to take into World Boss content, you want to take into Alliance Battle, GBR content, etc. And then for PvP, you're probably looking at a little bit more expensive investments with CTPs like Authority, Reforged, Refinement, Reforged, and then also Regen and maybe Conquest and things like that, Reforged. But yeah, in general, there's a higher barrier of entry for PvP, so it's something that you should consider later on once you've already got the PvE side of things mapped out, and I'll have a separate video on that later where we talk about sort of the account progression and how you want to sort of plan out your guide. But yeah, it is beyond the scope of this video. Once you've done the obelisk, once you've settled all that up, we've gone ahead and equipped the character with something, and for the sake of this example, we're going to go with this crit rate 120 proc obelisk. You're almost there. After this, there's basically just two things left. There's type enhancement, and then there's artifact. In the case of the artifact, it's pretty straightforward. If you have the character's artifact, great, equip it. If you don't have the character's artifact, farm dimension rifts. That's really all there is to say. Please do not equip a generic artifact. It's not going to do anything for the character, and you're just going to be wasting the celestial essence that you could be getting if instead of equipping it, you just dismantled it. And I know it's not a lot of celestial essence, but every little bit matters when you're saving it up to go and gamble it. So yeah, artifacts are pretty straightforward. You have it or you don't. That's basically it. For type enhancement, I would say most characters you can stop at rank 3 for the type enhancement. Also keep in mind that you can use tickets for characters that are native tier 1. You can use tickets on them. You cannot use tickets on native tier 2s. So if you are worried about your resources and you want to be efficient with them, save your enhancement kits, these things here. You want to save them for your native tier 2 characters and your native tier 3 characters. And then for everyone else, the native tier 1s, you want to use tickets that you could farm from Ultimate Story Mode when you open up the chest. But yeah, in general, type enhancement is more of a PvP thing than a PvE thing. It only really comes into play for PvE on the non-universal days of Dormammu GBR if you're trying to speed up your clears there, which can be important, which I'd say, higher rank is better. And then also for Mephisto World Boss Legend. For Mephisto World Boss Legend, for speed types specifically, yes, more type enhancement is better. You're going to do more damage to Mephisto. You're going to take less damage from Mephisto. Absolutely crucial. So if you are trying to push Mephisto, if you are trying to climb for that World Boss Legend and you have your speed type builds and they're not performing well, absolutely look into the type enhancement for a quick and dirty way to boost your damage to very high levels, because it scales your damage, not your attack. So it will have a very noticeable effect with a very low cost. So to summarize, what you want to do when you're building a character, you want to identify if they're a DPS, leadership, or support. If they're a leadership or support and it's not PvP, you basically want to give them a bare bones build like we had on Sin at the very beginning of the video. If they're a DPS, you want to give them a full build or as close to a full build as possible, which involves the following: getting their gears to the max level possible, getting their skills that have buffs to the max level possible, and leaving the rest at level 1 or level 3. identifying their stats and which ones you need to work on through Uru and ISO, particularly the most important stats like ignore defense and skill cooldown. You then want to give them Uru that matches their attack stat, and then any supplementary Uru that's going to boost those other important attack stats because they are a DPS. You want to combo that with, at minimum, stage 6 ISO 8 set, focusing on Overdrive, Power of Angry Hulk, or Hawk's Eye for those juicy, important base stats. Once you're done with that, you want to give the character a custom gear, at minimum a 5 or 6 star obelisk. CTP is even better, but like I said, CTP is not going to do the work for you. You want to get their uniform and max it out to Mythic if possible, and you want to get the other optional uniforms and max those out to Mythic if possible, with particular focus on the 2nd, 3rd, and 5th uniform options. Once all of that is done, you're basically almost there. You can slap on the character's artifact if you have them. Other artifacts for other characters will do nothing for your character, so don't bother doing that. And then you want to do their type enhancement last, especially if they are a speed type. You want to focus on this because it's going to boost their damage versus Mephisto World Boss Legend. So that is it for character builds and how to navigate them and how to do them as efficiently as possible. You have just passed another lesson in MFF University. Congratulations. Thank you for coming, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.